So all the presents have been opened. Wrapping paper stuffed into bags, the gift bags either stored until next year in the closet or stuffed with tissue paper and tossed into the trash. Maybe your Christmas tree is lying out on the curb, the ornaments safely stored in the basement until next year. And now you're trying to figure out what to do with all this stuff that you got. Some gifts were perfect. Folks went right on the Amazon wish list and they clicked the item. For me this year, that involved some outdoor cold gear for running. I'm not willing right now to go huff and puff inside of a gym, so this is helpful to make it through the winter months of exercise. Still, other gifts were unique, specific to our personality, our interests, and hobbies, something we never would have expected. A couple of years ago, Rebecca gave me a framed print of a scripted verse from the Psalms. That's one of my favorites, and now it hangs in our dining room. I never could have envisioned such a present for myself. It was really beautiful. And then there's this pile. What do we do with these? Can we re-gift any of this stuff? How many holiday-themed spatulas do you really need in the drawer? Why did Aunt Susie give our 14-year-old Matchbox cars again? One year as a child, my grandmother, she's dead, so she won't be watching this. My grandmother gave me a gift of an empty Avon bottle in the shape of a teepee. I still have it. In fact, I brought it. This was a present. No Avon, nothing in it. Just an empty Avon bottle in the shape of a teepee. Gifts are strange. They can be practical. They can show our depth of love and knowledge of another person. They can indulge a favorite hobby or activity. Or they can leave the gift receiver asking the question, does this person even know me at all? That may have been what Mary was thinking when these astrologers showed up at her home in Bethlehem. Maybe you've seen the cartoons depicting that after the three wise men left, the three wiser women showed up, much more aware. They come bearing diapers and formula and frozen casseroles to make it through the first 3 months. But Matthew isn't consulting what to expect in baby's first year when he's telling about the story of the Magi coming to Jesus. These gifts, as impractical as they are signals. They're helpful allusions to who this baby is, and they are intended to be strange. They are to leave us shocked and confused as Herod and all of Jerusalem with him. The gift of gold. The gift of gold matches the astrologer's interpretation of the star in the sky, that a new king has been born. It was appropriate at this time to offer kings gold as a sign of homage and respect. The same was true for unique spices and fragrances. So those were brought as well, especially if they were from a foreign, exotic land. You presented the best of your own native country to present to the king of this foreign country, honor and respect. Frankincense and myrrh are included in lists we have of the kinds of things that would be presented to a king when a king had been born. And so immediately when you read about these three gifts, you see that there's going to be a contrast and a conflict between the newborn king in Bethlehem and the king who sits on the throne in Jerusalem. The whole passage starts, right, in the days of King Herod. These gifts, by political role and holding of the power, these gifts should have been presented by the astrologers to King Herod. But the wise men, we read, present no gifts to him when they arrive in Jerusalem and meet with the king. And this question about the newborn king, you heard it in the text, it raises all of King Herod's anxieties. What King Herod knows and what all of Judea knows is that Herod's kingship is not legitimate. It's one of political opportunism. He's got it by cozying up to Emperor Augustus. Herod not only doesn't descend from David's royal line of kings, Herod's an Edomite. He's not even a descendant of Isaac and his son Jacob. An Edomite is a descendant of Esau, who was not a child of the covenant. So he's a poser as a king. Herod maintains his control by the use of fierce force, massive building campaigns, and tight control. So there's not much external opposition to Herod, but Herod knows what the people must be saying about him in the privacy of their own homes. He knows he could be exposed for who he really is, who he knows he really is. So it's not the king in Jerusalem who receives the gifts from the wise men. It's the unknown child in Bethlehem. This is a redefinition of a king. But the two fragrances have additional symbolisms as well. Myrrh, for example, was an ingredient in the high priest's anointing oil. Whatever the priest touches with this anointing oil is declared to be holy. In fact, this is what's said about the use of that oil in the book of Exodus. You shall say to the Israelites, this shall be my holy anointing oil throughout your generations. It shall not be used in any ordinary anointing of the body, and you shall make no other like it in composition. It is holy, and it shall be holy to you. Whoever compounds any like it, or whoever puts any of it on an unqualified person, shall be cut off from the people. That's in Exodus. Now, that's several thousand years before Jesus. In Jesus' time, the term of the anointed one was not just an anointing that kings traditionally got. It was anointing in reference to this coming Messiah. Messiah in Hebrew means anointed. Messiah in Greek is the word Christ. The Messiah is the one who will deliver the people from Roman rule, establish justice, restore Torah righteousness to the land, bringing an unprecedented time of peace and prosperity that had long ago been, but had not been for so many years, at that old forgotten time of David and Solomon and King Hezekiah. And so this gift of myrrh in the anointing oil, the message of Messiah, again raises the contrast between the child in Bethlehem and Herod. Herod has gained his seat by being Rome's lackey. The Messiah, who's promised to come, will deliver the people from Rome's authority. Then there's this gift of frankincense. Frankincense is part of the incense that is used in the Holy of Holies. The use of frankincense in that incense, again, comes from the book of Exodus. It was used in the traveling tabernacle. The tabernacle was this tent in the wilderness. Moses would go into the tent and commune with God there. And so again, this is the instruction on how that incense is to be used. And make an incense blended as by the perfumer, seasoned with salt, pure and holy. And you shall beat some of it into powder, and put part of it before the covenant in the tent of meeting, that's the tabernacle, where I shall meet with you. It shall be for you most holy. So while gold connotes clearly Jesus' political title and power, and while myrrh notes his anointed role as Messiah, the frankincense points us to the very presence of God. This incense is to be used only by those who will commune with the Almighty. Moses in the wilderness, the priests in Jerusalem in the Holy of Holies in Jesus' day at the temple. And now the ingredient for that incense is being presented to this child in Bethlehem. And so we have the third contrast between Jesus and Herod. Herod was responsible during his reign for expanding and improving the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. As an Edomite serving as king, Herod tried to improve his reputation among the people of Judea by his large-scale building projects around Jewish holy sites and shrines. Historical records tell us that Herod was not a particularly devout person, but he liked to do things publicly that made him look before others like he might be. And so the gift of frankincense, Matthew tells us, is that it isn't in the magnificent, expanded temple where God dwells. It's in this child. 3 gifts, 3 signals. King, Messiah, Emmanuel, God with us. Now, we're not astrologers. We don't live in Persia. But we do, in each of our own ways, come up against the Herods of our own lives. And we're presented with the opportunity to follow instead this other King, Messiah, Emmanuel. The wise men could have presented their gifts to Herod. In the story, the gifts were out there. They were in some kind of satchel bag, I guess, attached to the rump of a camel. But they left them out at the curb. They didn't take them into the palace there. They took them down to Bethlehem. They didn't give Herod any Christmas presents. Instead, they trusted the star. And they gave their gifts to one who didn't look like, by any of our human standards, any kind of monarch or mighty deliverer or deity. Do we lay our gifts down in the same way? Who is it that we're entrusting with our hopes? My friend Tom Toole tells a story about when he was the senior pastor of the Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church in Manhattan. The church there was sponsoring a build for a Habitat for Humanity. It was a particularly monumental build within the history of the organization, and so it was really publicized and promoted throughout Manhattan. You all know Habitat, an organization that helps people move into home ownership and out of lives of having to rent their properties. You may also know that since serving as president, Jimmy Carter and his wife Rosalind have been really involved with Habitat for Humanity, promoting its efforts and working on different housing projects as well. This build in Manhattan at this time, Tom told me, was such a big deal that former President Carter and Mrs. Carter were invited to come be part of the build, as well as people from all over the United States. People who had worked on other Habitat for Humanity projects, people who worked for the national organization. They'd all come up, all those people had congregated in Manhattan for the build. They were all staying at the local YMCA there near the build site. And so the conclusion of the work came, the family's dedication service. They were given the keys to their home. They were praised. Everybody was gathered there, the director, the members of Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church, all these volunteers from all over the country. And so President Carter was invited to stand up and speak before all the assembled people who were there. And he talked about Habitat for Humanity, the good that it did in the world, the dignity of life that it provided to those who were part of the mission. And at the conclusion of his remarks, he asked, are Stephen and Rachel from Maryland out there in the crowd somewhere? And this young couple, mid-20s, sort of sheepishly raised their hands, and he said, stand up, stand up. He goes, now y'all don't know that I've been told this, but I have found out over these days that we've been together. Stephen and Rachel, you all just got married last week, is that correct? And they said, yes, sir, we did. And he said, congratulations. I wish you all the best in your marriage together. And you chose, in the week following your wedding, not to go on a honeymoon, but to come here and work on this Habitat house. Yes? They replied, yes, sir, we did. He said, how many Habitat houses have you worked on? And they said, this will be our 20th. He said, that's just remarkable. He goes, and that whole time, you've been staying at the YMCA on these cots in these great rooms with all of these other volunteers the week after your wedding. That's correct? And they said, yes, sir, we have. And he said, we all know this. When you've been the President of the United States, people think that you always need to stay in luxury accommodations. And so Rosalind and I have been in the presidential suite at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, but she and I have talked about this, and we want you all to stay there tonight, and we're going to stay over at the YMCA on the cots with all the other volunteers. You can imagine at that moment the people erupted into applause and cheers at this great gift. And Tom, when he told me this story, said he was standing towards the back next to one of the Secret Service agents who's assigned to accompany President Carter and Mrs. Carter around, and he leaned over to the agent and he said, "This has got to be a nightmare for you with security to figure out how to make this transfer." And the guard said, "Yes, sir, it certainly is a headache and a great challenge to us, but I'll tell you, when you travel around with President Carter, you get used to it because he does this all the time." Friends, we have our gifts to offer. And we can say all we want to about what we're going to do with those gifts, but our behaviors ultimately define where we're laying them down. Is it a power that dominates and controls, or is it this power of Jesus that serves? Is our salvation found by accepting the world as it is and using whatever means necessary to get ahead, or is it trusting in a God who can deliver us to something better? Is it God's presence that's found in big shows and public displays and spectacle, or is it true that God's presence is known in an intimate encounter, in a moment of humbling ourselves before another? Others will know where we place our gifts by how we conduct our lives. And if Jesus is Lord, then we must return home by another road, a way that the Apostle Paul later will come to call the still more excellent way. Amen.